two things can be true at once. It could have been secretive, but not illegal. I don't understand what the conspiracy to commit criminal impersonation. What was the allegation of her criminal impersonation? And how do you get convicted of conspiracy to commit criminal impersonation, but not criminal impersonation? Like you're planning it, but you never get away with the actual criminal impersonation. What was
Exactly.
that?
So conspiracy is kind of just a step down where there's a shared agreement. So you may not be the person that actually effectuates the impersonation, but because you had a discussion or you were on a signal group that, hey, we're going to go be a part of this trusted build, we're going to observe, and we're going to see what Dominion does. That someone could argue that that was part of the basis for the conspiracy charge against her. What you'll find though is that even though there was 10 charges, the factual underpinnings for most of the charges are the same. So there's also an issue of duplicative charging here, where it's like, okay, aren't we kind of saying the same thing over and over and over again? And in fact, they are.
Even if people are inclined to, think that Tina is a righteous patriot in this, and I think many people are. It was a question as to whether or not she might have legitimately made some mistakes, which I'm not asking you to admit or deny, but was the forensic image subsequently uploaded to the internet?
I don't personally know, but I've read something to that effect, and that could be an issue. It's kind of like, WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. Like people can be upset about the process. I think there's a trigger though, Viva, that when you've tried to bring things to the proper authorities, that at some point a whistleblower can take on certain protections and their last recourse is to get something to the public. This was something that was debated fiercely with Edward Snowden, right? He signed security agreements that said, thou shalt not do this and not do that. And then he found out that there was massive subversion of the Fourth Amendment rights, which violated his oath to the Constitution. And so you have this tension between your oath to the higher law, and yet you sign a piece of paper that might criminalize your conduct. So all I can say is I think Tina was in a similar place. But if you've got fraud that's being facilitated through defective processes or defective machinery, and the people that are in charge for foisting that defective process or defective machinery on you are the ones that are trying to keep you silent, you have to ask the question, what was the only available recourse that Tina had? Either she can be buried in the darkness or she can get it out to the public. And so I think that's worthy of litigation. That's something that she probably would like to raise. But in most whistleblower instances, you're basically gagged and silenced through certain security agreements on what you will and won't do. And in most cases, I'd say that's valid. You want to protect the integrity of an office, but when the substance of what you're trying to reveal shows that you've got complicit actors in Dominion, in the SOS's office, and you've got massive subversion of your database, who do you take it to? And here's the other issue. You've got built-in conflicts because your district attorney appears on the ballot. Your sheriffs appear on the ballot. And so there's a vested interest to actually not investigate the architecture, which could lead to an election being undone. And so a lot of the people that were prosecuting this case had no business prosecuting the case because they were on the ballot that concerned the system that Tina was actually tasked with safeguarding.
Yeah, that is totally not predictable, but a fundamental flaw. There's no question about that. The issue is like the charges compared to what I would have imagined the charges being, impersonating, influencing, whatever. If the scheme here, as alleged by the state, is that she improperly accessed a database and then made a copy of it, I would imagine the charges would have been theft, fraud, something along those lines. Influencing a public servant, I view as specious as the fake slate of electors, which they were never fake, they were never fraudulent, but they got called that. This, like the illicit influencing of a public servant, sounds to me like they all were in agreement to do this because they all believed in the end goal. No one was being improperly influenced. Nobody was being criminally impersonated.
You're spot on. And I think that was a deliberate way of doing things on behalf of the prosecutor's office, because if there was an issue of authorized access, then she would necessarily be able to raise the defenses that were provided to her under federal and state law. So instead of doing that, they constructed a prosecution where that's not the issue. Access isn't the issue. That allowed them to go through these more amorphous, weird theories and then have the press editorialize and basically, concoct a headline that she breached the system when she was never charged with that. I still think that those defenses should have been raised because it goes to our mental state. And anytime you're dealing with a prosecution, you got to deal with the actus reus and the mens rea. And if she has an innocent framework that she's working with, that, yeah, you can say that I'm influencing a public servant. You could say that I'm violating a duty. I did not have the requisite intent to violate those laws. I actually had the intent to abide by another law. That was not allowed by the judge either.
The makeup of the jury in this case, I mean, other than the fact that I presume we can go statistically as wildly Democrat, demographics, who was in the jury?
For eyewitnesses that were there, it seemed like an unusually young jury, mostly 20, 21-year-olds. Most of the most compelling arguments, though, were done through proffers on arguments that tried to get evidence that was exculpatory for Tina, but it was all done outside of the presence of the jury. So there were jurors that were polled later, and one in particular was told about that provision under federal law to preserve the records. He's like, had I known about that law, I would have voted differently. So that's the kind of stuff that we're dealing with, is that the people that were watching live streams of the trial were more informed than the jury was.
I don't believe any jury members could possibly understand the charges in order to convict on them. I mean, the charges are not opaque, but like wildly confusing. Any person who attempts to influence any public servant by means of deceit, threat of violence, or economic reprisal. What evidence was there? Deceit. It sounds like they all did this very willingly, knowingly. The only difference being the dude making the image is a confidential informant. I would question whether or not any jury members could possibly understand those charges, but this sounds like it was built to be convicted from the get-go. They just couldn't get all, throw enough charges in to get her on some.
The jury instructions that were written, they weren't uniform instructions. That's the other thing. A lot of people that have done trials, they know that the safest place to be is to use a uniform jury instruction. And anytime a judge deviates away from those UJIs, usually they're very, very nervous. My look at the jury instructions shows that they're very, very much fashioned to match the talking points of the Secretary of State's office. And just because you've got a website that tells you your processes doesn't mean it's the law. So that was another problem.
How long did the trial last?
I want to say it was about a week. Jury selection on Friday or Monday, I think Monday. And then the prosecution had the full week to conduct their case. And Tina was given about 1 day. And many of the witnesses that she tried to get to testify weren't allowed to testify. I was one because I oversaw an audit in 8 counties that use the same Dominion systems in New Mexico. Our project file for 2020 was deleted illegally. So we had a crime scene in New Mexico. So her concerns were valid. You had someone like Clay Parikh, who is a whistleblower, forensic hacker that used to do testing for the voting systems like Dominion, like ES&S. His testimony was limited, where he could barely testify.
Why and who limited Tina's evidence to witnesses?
It was the judge. The judge makes the call. And that was the other thing that was odd, is that the state prosecutor seemed like he had another advocate in the courtroom through the judge's behavior. So there was actually another clerk in an adjacent county that did the same thing as Tina, who was not prosecuted. He was called to testify. And as soon as the judge knew what he was going to testify about, he basically limited the questions, and he got to answer 1 or 2 questions, and then he was dismissed from the witness stand. There's probably 4 or 5 credible technical experts that could talk about what happened, that were far more technical than me. I just, as a former prosecutor, I had to do memorandums and guidances to many clerks and commissions in my state. So it was very easy for me to look at Tina's evaluation of her legal standard or the legal conduct that she was required to conform to.
Experts would be good or useful for determining the legitimacy or the accuracy of the mirror image, or the image of the data. But the issue here, at least from the charges, is what was the deceit and fraud or threat that Tina used to pressure or influence public servants? Who was the criminal impersonation that Tina was convicted of conspiring to commit? Like, who was ultimately the one who criminally impersonated anybody? That charge was against Tina, not about someone else, and she conspired to criminally allow someone else to be criminally impersonated.
Yeah. So the conspiracy was an easier way to lump her, because obviously she wasn't impersonating a male. They didn't get very far with that charge, is my recollection. But the conspiracy on somehow having someone provide their access badge to allow him to to make the forensic image. Tina was grafted into that via the conspiracy charge.
Conspiracy to commit criminal impersonation. It was Conan, allegedly, who would have been the one criminally impersonating, and it was Tina conspiring to facilitate his criminal impersonation. That's what I should understand?
I think that would be the prosecutor's view of what transpired. Yeah.
And the criminal informant was obviously never charged. The confidential informant.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy? I mean, and that's the major question. Like the person that actually did the accessing, not charged, wasn't a co-defendant. While I've got you a captive audience, this is the same thing that's happening in Michigan. There was a private investigator that accessed some of the machines that were tested out of Michigan. The people that are going to trial in 2 or 3 weeks are Matthew DePerno, he's an attorney, and Stephanie Lambert, another attorney. These are the people that worked legally through the process, is to have experts come, and the very person that grabbed the equipment, facilitated that, is testifying against them, hasn't been charged. And so there seems to be this MO of informants materializing and conveniently helping people, and when the proverbial shit hits the fan, they're never around, and the person that's left holding the bag is a righteous person trying to get the truth. That happened in Mesa, it appears to me, because Conan should have testified. For the life of me, I don't understand why, because even the prosecution had an ethical responsibility to investigate the nature of his informant status as a prosecutor, but they never did their due diligence. There's lots of question marks for sure.
She got convicted. Sentencing is what? Is it the day after tomorrow?
October 3rd.
So that's close. It's this week. Now, I guess this is the million-dollar question. All of this is for naught if the forensic image shows nothing. I guess the question is going to be, what do those who say the forensic image confirms by way of irregularities, what does it show, or what is the smoking gun that is revealed from this forensic image compared to what Dominion produced?
Okay, so there's lots. And one, the first thing that I think was documented was that 29,000 election workers' records were either deleted or altered. That's a breach of your system. 2, the fact that project files were missing, that was a crime. That shouldn't have happened. Dominion facilitated a crime against the people of Mesa County.
Sorry, if I may stop you there. That is to say that Dominion's, after they got access to it, the allegation is that there were files missing from what they produced or what they possessed versus what was imaged by the confidential informant Conan.
The change to the system that revealed alterations and deletions and the emergence of 2 new databases materialized during the trusted build, which is what Dominion does. It's like basically under the auspices of us changing out the batteries, we're happening to basically reprogram everything and change things and basically cover up our tracks. And the experts were able to take a look of the image pre and post trusted build.
To play devil's advocate, someone might just argue that Conan's forensic imaging was bad itself, and so you can't compare anything to that because who even knows if he did it properly in the first place?
Well, I'm not saying that Conan set up Tina. What I'm saying is that there are questions that are raised when an FBI informant enters the fray, right? And I think
what about he intended to set her up? He certainly set her up. Now, he might not have been. He might have been participating, but
yeah, it raises questions that should be asked.